Good morning. I'm Steve Wolf, Wholesale Marketing Associate at Sprague.
And I'm Joel Williams, Director of Refined Product Sales here at Sprague.
Welcome to Sprague's Refined Products Review, where we share what's moving the market and the insight we see every day. So Joel, what's up with the war in Iran this week?
Last week we came on and we talked about a little bit of optimism around a deal, and the market obviously responded by going down for most of last week. This week we're going to see the other side, which is a little pessimism around the deal. Again, as you've seen sort of negotiations break down and some flare-ups in terms of some attacks and stuff, market is increasing the risk and we're seeing prices go up.
What do you see moving forward?
It would appear at this point, the primary strategy for this administration is the blockade. And, there are some pros to the blockade. One is that there certainly is sort of less death and destruction than there is with bombing. So that's great news. Also the oil assets are preserved. You're not necessarily blowing up pipelines or blowing up wells. So, that makes the restart after the war hopefully a little bit easier. It's also a very sound strategy in terms for the U.S. It does inflict quite a bit of pressure on Iran. I mean, if you look at it each day, there's $500 million in lost oil revenue each day. Iran's lost over 1 million jobs since the beginning of the war due to the constriction in their economy, which is basically a 5% increase in their unemployment rate. They're dealing with hyperinflation right now, so 70% increase in the cost of general goods and over 100% on some of the basic foodstuffs. Beyond that, they're seeing product shortages when it comes to things like medication, basic food, and essential consumer items. And, there's also, it's creating potentially irreversible damage to some of these wells. So as much as the wells aren't getting blown up, it does capping them and not producing out of them can become a big problem. So it is putting quite a bit of pressure. So it is a very effective strategy. The cons of it really, and this is mainly for the oil market, is that it just prolongs this whole issue, this war, and it compounds the supply issue that we're already seeing. You can just see the drastic fall off in the amount of oil coming out of the Strait, and all the other goods as well. And it's basically, down to almost nothing compared to what it was pre-war. And so what you see is that this, starts around the beginning of March and it just keeps going. And until we see the free and unencumbered passage of ships being allowed, and that this number is going to continue to stay low, and that's just going to continue causing problems. You're going to have either to cap these wells, which sometimes mean that you can never start them up again, or slow them down, which makes it really difficult to kind of ramp it up. And so we're going to put another chart up here that's kind of going to show the production recovery assumptions. And what you're seeing here is that really this is not a switch. It's not like, this is assuming that at the end of July, by the middle to end of July, that we see complete free passage through the Strait. You're going to see that it's going to take months. Even if that target was hit, it's not going to be to the end of the year that we're anywhere close to, sort of pre-war transportation through the Strait. And so, this really shows the point that we've been talking about before, which is that's not just the immediate issue. It's also sort of the prolonged issue here.
Well, the market waits for, stability and clarity. What do you see as the biggest wild card moving forward?
One is that any type of return to a bombing campaign. Obviously they've been, the U.S. has been, held itself back pretty good and is mostly focused on, some mine-laying ships here or there, some missile sites. Iran, on the other hand, has gone after some ships and that are trying to cross the Strait, other things like that. But if we see a resumption of going after oil assets, particularly if Iran starts to go after oil assets in neighboring countries throughout the Gulf, that's the type of thing that, the chart we just looked at, which is kind of the resumption of production, that can really push that, not only can really lower sort of where the starting point is and bringing down the amount of oil currently being produced, but it also can really lengthen that kind of resumption back to normal activities. So that's something we're clearly watching. And then another thing that we're looking at here is Bab el-Mandab Strait, which is on the other side of Saudi Arabia. And what we've seen is the Saudis have done a pretty good job of they have a pipeline that goes from where they would normally be piping through the Strait of Hormuz, that they can then ship the product to the other side of the country and go through that strait over there. And we've seen that go from only, 500,000 to 1 million barrels a day to now they're at almost 4 million barrels a day. So that is making up a good chunk of oil that they are getting back to market. And so the good news is that, they have this pipeline to get it over there. The docks are working. They're getting the boats out. But there is a pinch point over there as well, right outside of Yemen. And that's this Bab el-Mandab Strait that we spoke about. And there is the Houthis are another terror organization that is, sponsored by Iran. And if they decide to enter this war and close off that strait, all of a sudden that 4 million disappears from the market. So that can become very, very big as well. In terms of other things that can happen going forward, on the flip side is that realistically, we could see a diplomatic solution any day now. We really don't know where we are in the negotiations. And so we'll continue to listen to news bites and see what the administration's saying. But, again, any given day, any given time, we could hear there's a solution. It sounded like we were getting there close last week, far away this week. We'll see what the next week brings for us.
Outside of Iran, is there anything else you were watching?
Russia. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is still ongoing. Obviously, not getting as many press headlines as it was before. But what we're seeing is that Ukraine is continuing to attack oil infrastructure within Russia. Right now, that really hasn't hit the market too hard, but it is estimated that anywhere from 20 to 40% of Russian refining capacity is offline. You're even seeing some, allocations of products within Russia in terms of what consumers can use. So, that is definitely, taking away some of the refined product side. Now, the world needs crude right now more than it needs refined product. I mean, it needs both, but crude is what it generally needs. So what you're seeing is that this hasn't really hit the market yet because the crude oil that would normally be going into those refineries is just getting sold off into the market. So, but if Ukraine was to continue to go after the crude producing assets, more refineries, this is something that we got to keep our eyes on because, again, anything outside of the Iran conflict could compound that issue. And obviously, Russia's making up a big shortfall of the oil that we're seeing right now. So we'll keep an eye on that. The other thing that we're going to look at is U.S. exports. We'll throw another graph up here for you. And when you look at U.S. exports, I mean, this line is pretty stark. You see it's, at an all-time high. And we were going from, in the neighborhood of, 4-5 million a day, and now they're pushing up even higher. So, the real question here becomes how long can the U.S. continue to export at this level? It's going to be hard to build inventories when you keep sending all your products overseas. Another thing on U.S. inventories we're seeing is that, many of us were at Tripoli a couple of weeks ago, the Eastern Energy Expo, and Tom Closer was the keynote speaker. And if you look at one of his tweets from recently, he said that, in only 23 of the last 305 weeks in the 21st century, has the U.S. distillate stocks fallen below 100 million barrels. And his estimate is that this week we could see that number increase. So again, we're getting into all-time low inventories right now. So when we look at this picture again, products and crude going out, inventories going down, it paints a pretty dim picture in terms of what we're going to be for supply security going forward here.
So with all the issues we just talked about and the upcoming supply fears, why aren't suppliers just filling their tanks up, and having plenty of inventory to work off?
Yeah, your immediate thought would be, well, there's inventory around right now, why not fill it up? Unfortunately, the market doesn't really work that way and it doesn't allow for it. The market is creating a huge incentive to sell all that oil, and it's creating a absolutely punishing thing called backwardation for anyone who tries to hold oil. So as much as you would say, oh yeah, hold it, you just financially, you can't do it. I mean, if we look at last night's close, and again, we're filming this on Tuesday, but the front month closed at 364. And if we look out to May 2027, it closed at $3. So that's 64 cents of backwardation. That much backwardation throughout the entire curve for basically through the entire heating season just means that you can't hold inventory. It's just too financially punishing. There's no way to pull it off. And so given the forward curve we're seeing right now, no one's going to have the ability to really build inventories coming into this fall or this winter. And so what you're going to see is sort of an already fragile supply chain that we've talked about in the past is just going to become even more fragile. I mean, when you have inventory, any excess inventory provides you a little bit of cushion for any type of hiccups. And you're just not going to see any, additional inventory out there. There will be no cushion. Things are going to have to be perfectly executed for suppliers to stay wet. And so it really begs the question, who can pull that off and how can they do that to be able to keep prices at a reasonable level while also being able to continue to serve all their customers. It's going to be a very trying time for our supply teams, and we're going to see who can really pull it off.
So what should our customers be doing in this market dynamic?
First and foremost, customers should be keeping up to date on what's happening. You should be building relationships with the suppliers you trust, and you should be reaching out to your rep or to myself or to our sales desk here and seeing what we can do to help you out. In the end of the day, when things get fragile and tough like this, it's going to require us all to work together. If people are going to go off and be their own lone wolf and do their own thing, it's really going to be difficult for everyone to work cohesively to make this happen. So, we'll be reaching out to our customers and they should be reaching out to us. And ultimately, it becomes about developing a plan, and not having a plan is not an option coming into this fall and winter. I think anyone who wants to go in and just risk it is going to probably find themselves out of luck. And so, work with your supplier, find what your plan is. And at the end of the day, find someone you trust. This is what we do here at Sprague. We've been doing it for a long time. These are new wrinkles, but again, I think that we have the institutional knowledge within Sprague, and particularly with Hartree behind us, that added oomph to kind of find a way to get through this, and we will. So work with us, and we'll work with you, and let's get through this together, just like we always want to.
Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Joel.
Thank you very much for having me, Steve.
And be sure to mark your calendars for our next special feature, a tour of our Springfield terminal, releasing Friday, June 5th.
Well, that's all we have for today. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next Wednesday with another Refined Products Review. Refine your insight.
Fuel your success. And be sure to mark your calendars, our next special feature, a terminal tour of our Springfield terminal, releasing Friday, February. Friday, February.
Refine your insight.
Fuel your success.
One more time.